All right, let's go ahead and get to it. Welcome, everyone, to Classics 160D2, Classical Mythology, and today's lecture 8.2, the Midterm Review. So the goal of today is to get you guys ready for Friday's exam, make sure everybody knows kind of what's going on, what to expect, that sort of thing, and then you guys will all go off and do wonderful on it. All right, I got a text or a chat from somebody. All right, yeah, accommodations should be in there. I'll check it again to make sure. But accommodations should be in. Let me check real quick, actually, on that. Anyway, that'll take a second. I'll check it afterwards. Accommodations should be in. If they're not, go ahead and email your TA, and they'll get in touch with me. Okay. Here is the plan for today. A few announcements, nothing too exciting. Then we will confirm the format of the exam for Friday, and then we'll talk a little bit about the content of the exam. And the way that's going to work, it's just going to be a Q&A. And yeah, this is going to be recorded just like all the other lectures. By the end of today, I'll put it up on D2L. So announcements, you guys know the basic announcements by now, I should think. Basically put it in speaker view. You can see me, you can see the words on the screen. You guys know what to do. Once we get to the Q&A, actually I guess this one's a little bit different today. Once we get to the Q&A, I will have you guys go ahead and send me messages with the questions that you have, and I'll try to respond to them the best that I can. The other announcement is not so much for Friday's exam at all, but for looking towards the winter session. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying the course so far, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know that I liked the ancient world, but now I do like the ancient world. Or you're like, these gen eds are the single worst thing to ever happen to me in my life. And either way, whatever you feel about it, I would encourage you to take one of these gen eds over the winter session. It's a new course that I've put together called Pyramids and Mummies, all right? And so I'm offering this over the winter session. It basically is a entire course condensed down into 3.5 weeks, something like that. It's all online. It's asynchronous. You can watch the lectures whenever you want to, and it counts for one of your 150 gen eds. So whether you're loving this class and you're like, you know what would make winter break awesome? Is getting to watch all kinds of lectures about ancient Egypt? If so, go for it. Or if you're like, I'm so sick of gen eds, I want them over as quickly as possible, also go for it. There's no iCourse fee as far as I know. I'm not actually totally sure about that. But it is fully online and it's asynchronous, so there's no particular time you have to be in class. I've put together a little trailer. I'm not sure whether it's going to actually work, but hopefully this gives you a little taste of the class. And I don't know, hopefully it works. Let's see here. Let's see if I can take myself off. Disappearing. Very good.
Since the dawn of history, mankind has been bored by, well, history. Until one archaeologist cracked the code. Journey with me to ancient Egypt. To the pyramids of Giza and the temples of Karnak. To the depths of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Decipher the secrets of pyramids and mummies.
so I clearly spent way too much time on that, but I had a lot of fun doing it, and I think that you'll enjoy the course. Let's see if I can get through here, get back to this. There we go. No, we already did. There we go. On to exams. All right. So what is it? I will post the trailer on D2L. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of an ancient Egyptian take on something like this course. Some stuff on religion. It kind of takes you through ancient Egyptian culture and history from the unification of Egypt around 3000 BC all the way up through the Roman period. It's a ton of fun. Again, totally online. You can watch it whenever you want. You guys are awesome in the comments. Thanks for the positive feedback there. Let's talk a little bit about exam format here. Oh, also, if you've done all your Tier 1 Gen Eds, I'm also teaching a class on ancient athletics. So if you can imagine like Sports Center or something like that, but set in the ancient Greek world, kind of that's what that one's going to be. Again, that one's online. It's a Tier 2 Individuals and Societies Gen Ed or Humanities. It's a Tier 2 something. Those are all under the classics thing, so if you're interested, go ahead and put it in your shopping cart. I think you guys can... it is Humanities. Tier 2 Humanities. Thank you for that. Okay, awesome. Let's go ahead and talk about the exam here. You guys should know this by now. Hopefully you guys know this by now. The exam itself is going to be 26 questions, 25 of which are multiple choice. Okay? So you can use your notes for these. You can go back and watch old lectures for these. Whatever you guys can do to get the answer there. The idea, though, is that you're going to have a limited amount of time. You've got 50 minutes to do the exam. All right? And that's to get through the 25 multiple choice questions as well as the one essay question. And so you're really going to want to put some work over the next couple days into organizing your notes, making sure that you can find things efficiently, maybe typing them out so you can search your Word docs or something like that. Because if you take the entire 48 minutes to do the multiple choice, your essay is going to stink. If you finish your multiple choice questions in 20 minutes and you have half an hour to write the essay, it's probably going to be pretty good. All right? You can find those essay questions on D2L. I've put up 12 of them. One of those, word for word, is going to be the essay question itself. And what I'd like you guys to do now is write down kind of what I'm looking for in the essay question. All right. So this will apply to whichever one ends up showing up. All right. So the first thing may seem obvious, but it's have a clear answer to the question, right? Like whoever's reading this, when your TA reads this, they should be able to say okay, this is the answer to the question. All right, so I know that seems obvious, but sometimes you get these and it's unclear what the person's actually trying to argue. Make a clear argument here, all right? So that's part number one, right? Somebody said, so basically don't answer like a politician. Yes, 100%. Do not answer this like a politician. Answer this like somebody, somebody with a brain. Okay, all right, so answer the question clearly, creatively. That's part of it. The second part is going to be support your argument, support your answer with evidence, right? It should be very clear that you have an argument and then that there's different types of evidence that support that, okay? And that evidence ends up being your own logical reasoning, right? As well as specific evidence from the course. That can be stuff that we've talked about in lecture, or that can be stuff that you've read during your reading assignments, right? Now, one of the kind of big questions is always do we need citations? Yep, right on time, somebody asking about citations. You don't need the parenthetical citations, right? And you don't need a full bibliographic citation at the end. But your evidence is going to be stronger if you refer to the texts, right? Or if you have some sense of what authors and what texts are giving us the evidence to answer a question. So, for example, if there was a question about Zeus, right? And you talk a little bit about Zeus and you say something like in Hesiod's Theogony, Zeus is portrayed like this in the story of like Prometheus and the sacrifices. However, in Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, Zeus is kind of this background character who's portrayed in a very different way in whatever else is going on. Like, that's a way where you don't need parenthetical citations, but you're being really specific with the evidence that you're bringing to the table to support your argument, okay? If you're going through and doing like detailed outlines of these things, there's no specific number of references you need to make to texts or anything like that. But if you like kind of have a couple different specific references within each of these, I think it's just going to be a stronger answer. Again, there's no minimum, there's nothing like that. But if you kind of point out, you know, you're like, man, for each one of these essay questions, I've got like 3 distinct like pieces of evidence from texts, you're probably going to have a pretty darn strong answer there, okay? Let's see. Anything else there? Yeah, you can bring in stuff from lectures. Be specific, right? As an example there, something like if you were talking about Zeus, and it was like, what's the nature of Zeus, right? What makes him the king of the gods or something like that? And you were like, well, you know, Zeus kind of just does whatever he wants, and, you know, he's always kind of stealing women and doing whatever he wants to women and guys and pretty much anything. Like, that's okay. You're explaining kind of who Zeus is. But if your answer is something along the lines of like, one of the things that makes Zeus king of the gods is that he takes whatever he wants. As we see in the story of Leda and the Swan, he can come down and take the wife of the king of Sparta. As we see in the story of Zeus and or of Europa and the bull, right? He goes down to Phoenicia and he steals this Phoenician princess and he carries her off to Crete. Now, instead of just saying that like he does whatever he wants and he takes people, you're giving very specific examples of that, okay? So have a clear argument, support your argument with evidence, and make that evidence specific. Somebody was asking, do we need to cite lectures or is it okay to cite lectures? Yeah, like especially, you don't have to actually say like, I don't think you really need to cite them. You can just use the information from the lectures. Okay, I got another question here. Is it like the reading responses where if it's more of an open-ended question, if we support our argument with evidence, then we get the points, or does it have to be 100% accurate? I would say that it is more along the lines of the kind of reading response questions where you could have people arguing very different things and have them both be very good answers. Okay, if that makes sense. The multiple choice questions are really meant to test your kind of factual knowledge. This is meant to test your creative thinking, your ability to support that kind of creative thinking with evidence. And then finally, I would say write clearly, all right? This isn't going to be published in an academic journal. It doesn't need to be super duper formal, but like you are submitting it in a college class for assessment. And so like, write semi-formally and even more importantly than like the formality, make sure you're really clear, right? You don't want your TA reading this and just being a little bit confused about what you're trying to say. Okay, so those are the 3 things, right? Have a clear argument, support that argument with evidence. The more specific you can be with the evidence, the better. And then write clearly and comprehensibly so that everybody knows what you're trying to say. All right, let me tackle a few questions on here. So I got one question on DRC stuff. I will check that after this class. I thought I input everybody who had them yesterday. Drew, like I thought I did that for you. Let me check again though, just to make sure. Other questions. Are we allowed to reference myths we haven't covered in class? Sure. Yeah. I mean, like that. I would make sure that you're like accurate on those, right? Like otherwise, you don't want to just sound like you're making things up totally. Let's see what else. Are PowerPoint slides on D2L or just the recorded lectures? It's just the recorded lectures. And here's my thinking on this. I've gotten this question a couple times. The idea is that like I would like you guys to go through these and actually either write down notes by hand or type them out yourself, rather than kind of just go through and copy and paste the text into a Word doc and then be able to search it all, right? You have access to it all. If you take the notes, you've got that down and you can do whatever kind of searching you want. But I want you to go through the process of that, because going through the process of writing it down is going to be useful for burning it into your brain. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Word requirement. There is no word requirement. Again, I would say that like if you have a couple sentences, you're probably going to be on the short end. If you have 1,500 words, you're going to be on, if you have 1,000 words, you're going to be on the long end, all right? So probably something between 100 and 1,000 words. There's your order of magnitude range. Again, you know, you're going to be graded on the quality and quantity of your response. All right. Will you be asking us specific questions about myths, or will they just be general questions? I would say on the multiple choice stuff, specificity is fair game, right? So an example, I'm trying to think of an example question that won't be on there, but that would be a good example of the level of specificity. It might be something along the lines of like, there are numerous rituals associated with Demeter. What is the, what's one of the main rituals where gender roles get inverted and women get really drunk and men serve them dinner and they eat phallus-shaped cakes? And you'd be like, oh man, that's pretty detailed. But that's like something we covered. You can have that in your notes. You should be able to find that in the lecture, that sort of thing. That's probably towards the more detailed end of them. But that would give you an example of a relatively difficult multiple choice question on there. Okay, another question about in-text citations. Again, you don't need parenthetical citations. It is useful to reference like where your evidence is coming from, especially if we've covered it in class, right? Like if we haven't covered it, you don't need to go bring in some text that we haven't covered. If we have covered it and you're talking about like the, you know, Aphrodite and Anchises or something like that from the Hymn of Aphrodite, if we covered it, like say that, right? The Homeric Hymn of Aphrodite. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? 2 or 3 paragraphs, good for the essay. Yeah, probably like something in that range, right? Depends how long the paragraphs are. I think that's relatively good. Are there going to be questions where it seems like 2 of the answers are correct? I've tried to make it so that's not the case, right? I mean, I've tried to make them like relatively kind of not super obvious questions where like somebody who hasn't even been in the class could answer them. But I've also tried to make it so that there is like one demonstrably right answer and other demonstrably wrong answers where it's not just totally opinion-based. Okay, can we refer to, like for essays, can we like copy and paste from reading responses or things like that? I don't really have a problem with you guys like copy and pasting things that you've done. You know, my kind of goal with this is that you study hard and you learn the stuff. And if like you end up putting in 10 hours of preparation and mapping out each of these like essay questions and you've got really good stuff that you want to bring in there, great, right? Like you've studied really hard and you should get a good grade then. All right, what else? If we use the lectures to answer the essay questions, do we have to have citations? You know, again, reference the texts. You don't need parenthetical citations. Do I have any practice exams? No, I don't really have practice exams. I think on the study guide there might be some example kind of multiple choice questions to give you a sense for what they're like. Okay. We can loop back to format questions as we move on. I'd like to go ahead and move on now to content. And what we're going to do is just kind of go through each week, more or less. And if you guys have questions, I'll put up kind of the list of things we talked about that week. If you have questions, I'll try my best to answer them. If I don't know the answer, I will bug the TAs about it. If they don't know the answer, Well, I'll just tell you that it's not on the exam. Okay. Oh, first let's do attendance for the day. Hercules is looking blue. Maybe he's looking blue because there's an exam on Friday. Oh, is there an attendance quiz on Friday? No, just a reminder on Friday, there's like no Zoom action at all. So no attendance quiz, no Zoom action. Your attendance, it just doesn't really count into the total number of attendance things. So just go on to D2L at 11 a.m. and you'll have access to the exam. Drew, I'm checking yours right now. I might have just given you the wrong access or something like that. Let me check that. All right, Drew, you should be good to go there. All right, let's go ahead and continue on here. Exam content. Let's go back to the very, very beginning. Yeah, let's start with the origin of the gods. A couple other questions. So we can't start it earlier. It opens exactly at 11. Correct, it opens exactly at 11. Yes, the test availability does end at 11:50. What happens if we don't finish it on time? There's like a 1 minute grace period or something, and then it just stops and like it submits whatever you have at that moment. So if that happens, and you could imagine this happened like writing the essay or something, and you're like trying to type and time runs out and then the grace period runs out. Don't worry, like it's not like nothing got saved. Whatever you had will end up being submitted at that time. Can you go back through multiple choice and essay questions and go back and answer them? Yes, you can. You can move back and forth between questions. And Drew, good. Okay, so in the beginning, right? Like, let's do a quick little trivia quiz. Who is our what's our main source for the big epic origin story of the Greek gods? Good. Hesiod's our main source, and who is the first of those gods? All right, I'm getting it from a couple of people here. Chaos, right? Excellent. Then what happens? What's the next generation? Who does Chaos give birth to? That kind of starts the lineage that leads us to the Olympian gods. Excellent. We've got Gaia, and then from Gaia, who does she give birth to and then make out with? Yep, Uranus or Uranus. And then what happens to that poor guy? Maybe not poor guy. He wasn't very good to his own children. Yeah, lots of interesting ways of putting this in the chat here. We'll use the formal term. He gets castrated, and then it ends up flying across the sky. Okay, very good. But what happens? Like, that sounds like a very bad and ugly and terrible thing, but something beautiful comes out of that. Who comes out of this incident? Yes, of course, it's Aphrodite, and she ends up rising out of the sea. And where does she end up rising out of the sea? Exactly, right? Like off the coast of Cyprus, right? And so that's kind of, it's easy to get that confused. Cyprus and Crete, both very large islands, kind of south or a little bit southeast of mainland Greece. But Cyprus is kind of traditionally where she's said to have emerged from the sea. Okay, so that ends up happening, and Cronus is the guy who does the castrating. And then, of course, he lives a very long and peaceful life, right? I mean, not really, right? Like, what ends up happening to Cronus then? Yeah, exactly. Like anybody, he eats his children, right? He gets a prophecy that he's going to be overthrown. He eats his children. And the last one, tiny baby Zeus, is the only one who's saved from this. And then he ends up coming back, giving his dad the kind of like syrup of Ipecac or whatever. And then there's a big battle. And what's that big battle known as? Yes, exactly. The Titanomachy. Very, very good. And in that battle, the Olympian gods team up with the Hecatoncheires and with the Cyclopes, right? The Cyclopes, the ones making the armor and weapons for the Olympian gods, and they are eventually able to defeat the Titans, and then they get all these punishments, right? Like Atlas having to hold up the world. And then somebody like Prometheus. Why is Prometheus a relevant name here, right? So we read Prometheus bound. He's bound up to a rock. What's his role in this whole deal? Yeah, so he gives fire to man, and he's actually in the process, or he's part of the process of making man and then giving fire to them. And then Pandora at the end, right? We get our first woman, and what does Pandora do? Everybody loves her at first. Why does everybody stop loving her? Yes, exactly. She opened the box, right? And all the plague and pestilence in the world started flying out. Except for one last thing. What was the one last thing in the box? Hope, of course. Yes, I don't know why we want that in the box. That's actually what we want in the world. All right, so this is all the way back from like week 2 of the class. You guys have a very, very good memory going all the way back to then. Again, if you feel confident with the kind of questions I was asking you there, I think you're going to feel relatively good about most of the multiple choice questions on this test. Okay, let's move on to Zeus and Hera, all right? And any questions we have before we kind of start telling the stories of Zeus, right? We were kind of already told the origin story of Zeus, right, coming from Cronus and Rhea. Any questions we've got? Oh, okay, so Gilgamesh is something that I talked about in a previous version of the class. It won't be on the exam. And yes, today's lecture is sponsored by Powerade. Mixed berry. For all your hydration needs, whenever you're teaching or learning in today's online environment. Okay, so questions. Why does the death of Sarpedon matter? That's a great question there. And kind of the reason it's important is, I would say, twofold. One, kind of the reason it's important in terms of our conception of who Zeus is it shows the limitations of Zeus's power, right? So Zeus is the king of the gods, right? He's supposed to like have power over everything. And we see in a story like this that that's not actually the way he's conceived of. That there are checks and balances kind of within the Olympian gods that mean he can't do necessarily everything he would potentially like to do. So Sarpedon is his son. He would very much not like his son to die, but Hera and the other Olympians are like, brah, like, you can't go around just saving people you like. You got to let things play out the way they will. And so kind of the reason it's important conceptually is because it shows the limitations of Zeus's power. No matter how much he might like somebody, he can't always do something to save them. The other reason it's important is because it's like the topic of one of the most famous like Greek vases in all of antiquity, the Euphronius crater. So this vase that shows the death of Sarpedon, and then we see Hermes on there, and we see Thanatos and Hypnos ready to take him to the underworld. Very, very famous vase. Okay, good. So let's see what else we have. The Tonaia festival. So this is one of the festivals associated with Hera from the island of Samos. Right? So this is important because it's one of the festivals associated with Hera from the island of Samos. It comes from this kind of story that had emerged where pirates had showed up on the island. They had robbed the temple of Hera, taken the cult statue, and when they got the cult statue onto the boat, like the boat would refuse to move, right? It was like so heavy that like Hera was like holding down the boat and the boat couldn't move. And what ends up happening is this gets commemorated in ritual where once a year the cult statue is brought out and it's like bound to a tree to kind of somehow reflect upon this time when it was being stolen and yet it refused to move. And then there's a lot of fertility symbols associated with the sacrifices during that festival. So things like pine cones and cakes and things like that. So a festival associated with Hera on the island of Samos. All right, what else? In the story of Zeus and Io, does Hera release flies and have them chase Io to Egypt? Yeah, so it's not just like flies, it's particularly like one giant terrible like horse fly, you know, those flies that like bite you really bad. So this is after like kind of she ends up taking control of it, and then Zeus gets her back by sending Hermes to go chop off the head of Argus Panoptes, and then he gets the cow or Io in the form of a cow back, but then Hera sends this biting fly, and that's when Io gets chased all the way around, and we get things like Ionia and the Ionian Sea, and eventually she ends up seeing Prometheus, right? And she's like, hey, it's not that bad. Like, you're gonna get freed eventually. And then she ends up in Egypt and gives birth to offspring who's like grandson, ends up being the great hero Heracles, who actually does end up freeing Prometheus. Okay. Let's see, what else? This is a good question. Who's the god of fertility? It seems like it's like Hera and Aphrodite and Demeter and all of them. So kind of all of them is right? Like if you had an essay question that was something along the lines of like, talk about like fertility as it relates to the gods, you would absolutely be referencing lots of different gods and goddesses in this, right? And fertility tends to apply both to the kind of physical world, right? Actually producing offspring, as well as to agriculture and things like that. Okay, let's move on. We got Demeter and Hades here, right? What questions do we have about Demeter and Hades? Remember when we talked about Hades, right? One of the big things we talked about was kind of how to differentiate how we conceive of Hades versus how we conceive of like the underworld in kind of Western Judeo-Christian religion, right? Where it's like you're either in the fiery pits of hell or you're up on a nice cloud of paradise in heaven. What happens to you in the ancient Greek world if you're like kind of sort of a normal person? Yeah, whoever said you just, Taylor, you just wander around, right? Like most people are just going around and just kind of wandering around for all of eternity. It's only if you're really, really heroic do you go to some place like the Elysian Plain, and it's only if you're like really, really bad do you go to some place like Tartarus to be tortured for eternity. Somebody asked about the Chthonian Zeus, right? So the word Chthonian here, this basically means like underworld Zeus, right? So one of the epithets that Hades gets is kind of Chthonian Zeus or underworld Zeus because he's a ruler like Zeus, but he's just ruling the underworld. Yep, the fields of Asphodel, that's the kind of term for this area where the wandering occurs. And then we have a series of stories, right, about kind of the unfortunate souls who did do something really, really bad, like Tantalus chopping up his son and trying to feed him to the gods after stealing the nectar and ambrosia from the gods, and stealing the little tiny golden dog of Zeus. So he's going to get tortured. Anybody remember what happens to Tantalus? Yeah, exactly, right? He gets put into this kind of river or like lake, and he's got this tree, this fruit tree above him, but every time he reaches for the fruit, he can't get it. Every time he goes down to drink from the water or from the Powerade, mixed berry, it's delicious. He can't have that either. Okay, then we've got some of these. What's like the ekphora? What does that have to do with anything that we've been talking about? Exactly. Good. Yeah. The ekphora has to do with the actual funerary rituals, right? So one of the things we want to know when we're thinking about the underworld is not just kind of how it's conceived of mythologically, but also a little bit about the actual funerary rituals in ancient Greece, right? And so we have this kind of three-step process: the prosthesis, the laying out and preparation of the body; the ekphora, which is the kind of procession from the place of preparation to the grave site, and then we've got this kind of feast and repeated visitation to the grave itself. Very, very good. Very, very good. Let's see. What's the telesterion? Telesterion. Very good. Yes, exactly. It is the major temple to Demeter at the site of Eleusis, and it is the kind of final end point of the Eleusinian mysteries, right? Where people move from Athens down to Piraeus. They take their baby pigs and they wash them in the water there. Then they process to the site of Eleusis, about 14 miles west. They sacrifice the pigs. They walk around the site. They eventually end up inside the temple of Demeter, where there is some sort of thing revealed to them, right? That's why this is a mystery religion. When we talk about mystery religions, who's the other person that we talked a little bit about mystery religions with? Yeah, exactly. Dionysus. Very good. And the idea here, right, with these mystery religions is that they're a little bit different than the kind of what we'd say like normal civic religions are. So you get kind of religion happening in a couple different ways. First, you have pan-Hellenic religion. And this isn't necessarily, that word's not going to be on the test, but what that means is like people from all Greek city-states participate in it. So when you go to a site like Delphi or Olympia, these are what we call pan-Hellenic sanctuaries where all different city-states show up and worship. So at Delphi, everybody's showing up to worship Apollo. At Olympia, everybody's showing up to worship Zeus. In addition to that, you have what we call civic religion. So all sorts of different religious rituals associated with particular goddesses in particular city-states. So one of the big ones we talked about was with Athena, right? And the kind of patron goddess of Athens, and especially the Pan-Athenaic festival associated with Athena. And so that would be an example of a civic religion. And mystery religions are like a third kind of different type of thing. And they tend to be marked for a couple reasons. One, they tend to be much more open than civic or pan-Hellenic religions, meaning that like frequently like women can participate, foreigners can participate, slaves can frequently participate in these sorts of things. And so it applies to a broader range of people. There's some initiatory rite to these mystery religions, and then at the end there's some sort of kind of mystery that's revolved. It could be an object, a piece of knowledge, something like that, that the initiate ends up having access to after they go through the ritual. Okay, let's see what we got here. Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Ares, right? We talked about the birth of Aphrodite already. Let's see, what about marriage? What do we learn about marriage through all of this? And what's the kind of our story where we talked kind of through that exemplifies some of the difficulties regarding the conception of marriage in ancient Greece? Yeah, very good, right? Like, so it's the story of the judgment of Paris and Helen of Troy. And this idea that even though this is kind of the launching point for the Iliad and the Odyssey and the epic cycle, the kind of judgment of Paris, in addition to kind of starting this epic, right, is also a way to deal with some of the complexities of marriage and convey this idea that maybe marriage shouldn't really be about kind of passion and love that you might have in today's world, right? That when that happens, and you have somebody from Troy going in, and then Helen either being snatched away or willingly going with Paris, right? It ends up causing problems, in this case, a 10-year-long war. So yeah, marriage isn't necessarily about love. And in fact, when you do make decisions based on love, bad things can happen. And one of the parallels there, right, that we parallel with Aphrodite is her, well, not so much her husband, Hephaestus, but her other kind of like partner, Ares, right? She's always having an affair with Ares. And the idea is that there's a parallel between kind of like the craziness that love brings on in the bedroom, right? Versus the craziness that like, craziness of an emotion that is brought out on the battlefield, right? With like the rage and bloodlust that are associated with Ares. So same kind of uncontrolled emotion in two very, very different realms. All right. Yeah, poor Hephaestus indeed. For the Greek god image, for the exam, how specific of the god would it be? What do you mean the Greek god image? Anyway, tell me more about that. Somebody asked about agreeable compulsion. This is kind of one of the ways that we could translate Peitho, who is one of the offspring of Aphrodite. It kind of has to deal with persuasion, something like that. This is the idea that you kind of end up going along with things like marriage, like democratic decisions that maybe you weren't necessarily in favor of, both with regard to marriage as well as with regard to government and democracy. The idea that you kind of go along with it agreeably, even if it isn't exactly what you want, for the betterment of the group as the whole. Oh, okay, yeah. So the person's actually asking, identify an image, like a god from an image that I give. Yeah, I mean, it would end up being, you'll have some concrete things to identify with, right? Like, if I was giving you an image of Poseidon, he would have like a trident or something like that. I'm not going to give you an image of Poseidon without the trident or any other identifying characteristics. If it was Hephaestus, right, he would probably have like a hammer. If it were, Hermes, we've talked about like the hat and the caduceus, right, and the winged sandals. There will be like concrete things on there that will allow you to identify the god. Okay, so Athena and Poseidon, right? We talked about Athena kind of being one of the gods of civilization, right? Of cities and people living in cities and craftsmen, as well as wisdom. Also warfare, but the positive aspects of warfare. Whereas Poseidon is kind of one of these gods of like chaos and nature, right? Riding around on his seahorses, causing earthquakes, things like that. So somebody asked Ares, Danus, and Androphantes. Those are two of the epithets of Ares, like fearsome Ares and Ares the manslayer. And what is the main story where we link Athena and Poseidon? Yeah, right. The contest for the birth of Athens. Very, very good. One of the things that you want to kind of be familiar with is we talked quite a bit about the Acropolis, right, and the Parthenon, the decoration on the Parthenon. To give you a sense of specificity again for these kind of multiple choice questions, I wouldn't expect you to remember which set of battles are on which, like, metopes, right? You don't need to remember that the North metopes are whatever. I would expect you to remember that all the metopes kind of have decoration of Greeks fighting people and like subduing kind of barbarian groups, right? And the idea is that this is exemplifying Athens and Greece's kind of subjugation of the wild chaos, that sort of thing. And then on the pediments themselves, right, we've got the birth of Athena, we've got the contest for Athens, and then on the frieze, right, that continuous piece of sculpture, we have got the Pan-Athenaic procession, that festival that happens, at least in its large form, every 4 years, that kind of celebrates Athena and brings her a new garment. Okay, we talked about Hermes and Hestia, right? Hermes is the god of like a million things. He's a messenger god. He's the god of travelers, right? We've talked about the way that he looks, right, with his hat and his caduceus and his sandals. We've talked about how like Hermes, right, where it has the phallus as well as like the head on this kind of pillar, is used to mark different kind of intersections in roads and entranceways, things like that. And this kind of ipiphallic depiction of gods ends up being what we call apotropaic, right? So ipiphallic kind of means erect, apotropaic ends up meaning a way to ward off evil. And so very frequently at these things, shop fronts, door entranceways, intersections of roads, things like that, these things will be portrayed, and it's both to ward off evil as well as to kind of bring good fortune to those inside any sort of place. Hermes Psychopomp. Psychopomp is one of the epithets of Hermes, in particular at the Amphisteria festival, where it's his job to take souls to the underworld, right? So that is his term for his role in terms of carrying souls from, right, like once they die, from the actual world down to Hades in the underworld. And then we talked lots about Dionysus and drinking wine, the Amphisteria festival, right? How Dionysus, kind of like Aphrodite and kind of like Ares, through this wine drinking can kind of cause this sort of craziness. The Amphisteria being this 3-day festival where each day is named after a different type of ceramic vessel. Let's see. We talked about his association with the mystery religion, in particular from the Villa of the Mysteries at Pompeii. So let's go ahead and wrap it up for now. For Friday, go ahead and study for the exam, right? If you have any questions between now and then, feel free to email your TAs. They'll be able to get back to you. Anything they don't know, they can forward to me. Again, the exam will open at Friday at 11 a.m. You'll have 50 minutes to take it. Budget your time wisely. Have your notes ready to go when you start. Good luck with it. You don't have to show up to any Zoom on Friday, but do show up Monday, and we are going to start talking about the heroes of the ancient Greek world. So go ahead and good luck on the exam, and I will see you guys Monday. All right. Bye, everyone.